Hey guys, in this video we're going to be looking at chapter 6 of the Ecce textbook titled Early in the Day. And in the story for this chapter you're going to be reading a little bit more about the day-to-day operations of a Roman house, especially what the slaves are doing. The grammar for this chapter is going to bring us back to the infinitive. You're going to learn one more use of the infinitive, as well as something called gender, which is a really important concept that has to do with nouns and adjectives. So to start, as always, we want to look at the vocabulary for chapter 6. And you want to remember that learning these derivatives will help you remember the Latin definitions as well as apply these words to your daily life. So the first word we want to look at is surget, which means he or she gets up or rises. And you want to think of a wave, and when a wave rises up, we say it surges. That's the definition we're using with this Latin. The next word is pater, which in Latin means father, and a lot of different definitions come from this in English, including paternal, paternity, patrician, patronize, and patronage. And if you notice, they all are holding on to that same root of pater, which means father. If you're talking about someone's paternal instincts, you're talking about their fatherly instincts, just like a paternity test is going to show who your father is. And if you think of the Romance languages, this word actually shows up in Spanish through padre, French with père, and Italian with padre. They're all holding on to that same Latin root for father. The next word we want to look at is mater, which means mother, of course. And this also has a bunch of English derivatives, including maternity, matriarch, maternal, matron, matrimony. They all have to do with the word mother. So just like paternity shows you who your father is, maternity is talking about your mother. And maternal instincts are those motherly instincts. And again, if we look at the Romance languages, you can see that this word shows up across most of them with madre, mère, and madre. Next, we want to look at the adjective omnes, which means all. And in English, we get words like omnipresent, omnipotent, omnivorous, or omniscient. And they're all holding on to the same omni root, which means all. So if you think of the word omnipresent, it's talking about being present everywhere. Omnipotent means all-powerful. Omniscient means all-knowing. And omnivorous is talking about an animal that eats everything. Next, we want to look at the word observat, which in English means observe, just like the Latin, and you can see why. This directly comes from the Latin. Next, we have purgat, and in English we get the word purge from this. Now, purgat in Latin in your book, it's going to use the definition he or she cleans. And the word purge holds the same meaning in English. If you think of something being purged, it usually has this sense of being cleaned out or wiped out. That's where the root comes from. Next we have the word strenue, which is an adverb that means strenuously or hard. And again, we can see that in English, the derivative is holding on to that exact same root with strenuous. It's spelt the same way, and it holds the exact same meaning. The next word, aqua, means water in Latin, and from this we get aquatic, which holds that same meaning. And what you'll learn is that since English is comprised of a couple different languages, including Latin and German, there's often two different ways to say something. So whenever you see a word like water, which is the more simplified version of the word, it's coming from the German. The more scientific or fancy word is usually Latin. So in this case, everyone says water when they're talking in daily life. But if you read a science journal, it'll say aquatic. That aquatic word is coming from the Latin. Portant means they carry, and a good derivative to think of for this is the word transport, which literally in Latin means to carry across. Reprehendit is a word that means he or she scolds, and in English we get the derivative reprehend, which is basically the exact same spelling and it's holding on to the exact same meaning as well. The word docet in Latin means he or she teaches. And from this, we're going to get English derivatives such as doctor, doctrine, docile, and document. And if you think about the meanings of these in English, they're all holding on to that root of teaching. The word curare in Latin means to take care of or to look after. And from this in English, we get the derivatives cure and curator. And this makes a lot of sense if you think of their definitions. If you're curing someone, you're looking after them or taking care of them when they're sick. Just like the curator of a museum is the person who will go around looking after the artwork and making sure that it doesn't get ruined. So the grammar for this chapter has to do with infinitives, and specifically we're going to be looking at them again, but with something called impersonal verb phrases. It's just one more use of the infinitive, so you want to draw back on the knowledge that we've already learned. So just to recap, infinitives in Latin end in re, and we usually translate them to do something. Often they're going to go with a non-infinitive verb. So if you think back to previous chapters, we used examples such as I want to sleep. And you can see the infinitive there is to sleep. And the verb it's going with is want. This is what we call a complementary infinitive. You're finishing the thought. You're saying, I want to do what? To sleep. And remember, these verbs include wult, wolo, nolo, paras, and potest. And we're going to see more as we go along. So, for instance, if you saw sextus wants, in Latin you would translate it sextus vult. And remember, you ask yourself, sextus wants what? And the answer might be to sleep, which is the infinitive, dormire. Now we're going to look at something called an impersonal verbal phrase. And it's called impersonal because it doesn't contain a specific subject. So we supply the word it. This is what we mean by impersonal. So the impersonal phrase we're going to be seeing a lot in this chapter is necesse est, which we translate it is necessary. And if you take necesse est, you can see that it always is going to go with an infinitive. So for instance, if you had necesse est reprehendere, it means it is necessary to scold. The infinitive here is functioning in the same way as we learned complementary infinitives. It's finishing the thought. You're saying it is necessary to do what? To scold. So again, if we look at this example sentence, necesse est ascendere arborem, it means it is necessary to climb the tree. There's your infinitive there, ascendere, and it's going with the impersonal phrase necesse est. So if we were going to mark this up for our core elements, you would see that there's a direct object here, arborem. And what you're saying is, ascendere arborem, it is necessary to climb what? The tree. If we're going to mark this up, you have a transitive verb in ascendere and your direct object in arborem. The next grammar topic we're going to be looking at is gender, and specifically we're going to be looking at nouns and adjectives. Now you want to take careful notes on this because the concept of gender is one that will show up again and again through your time studying Latin, and it's really important to understand it right now at the beginning. What do we mean by gender? Gender is a way of categorizing Latin nouns based on behaviors associated with them. So we have to flesh this out a little bit. But the three genders we're going to be looking at are masculine, feminine, and neuter. And basically, masculine would be saying something like he, feminine would be she, and neuter would be it. So in other words, we're saying that masculine gender has to do with males, feminine with females, and neuter with objects. So you want to just take a quick note that even though Latin nouns that indicate males are masculine and those that indicate females are feminine, this concept of gender is a grammatical concept. This means that the natural way of thinking about gender, meaning associating masculine with males and feminine with females, it doesn't quite always work that way in Latin. And you'll see exactly what I mean as we move through the book. But for instance, let's look at the word porta, which we've learned means door. This word you might think is neuter because a door is an inanimate object. But in Latin, this is actually a feminine word. This is what I mean by a grammatical concept. It's not always going to match up with what you think would be the right answer in your head. So you really have to pay attention when your book tells you the. So let's take a look at a few more words. So if we look at these 5 words, Cornelius, Marcus, Weir, Servus, and Amicus, we can see that they're all talking about men. Cornelius and Marcus are a man and a boy. Weir means man. Servus means a male slave. And Amicus is a male friend. And you can see that all 5 of these are masculine in gender. And the other thing to notice is that they have a pattern with this US ending. This is the first hint. words that are masculine are often going to end in this US. So let's look at 5 more. What about Aurelia, Stola, Piscina, Amica, and Cornelia? These 5 words all have to do with women. So Aurelia and Cornelia are 2 women in our book. A stola, we learned in the earlier chapters, is a piece of clothing specifically for women. And then you have the word amica, which is a female friend. Now all 5 of these are feminine words. And again, don't get thrown off by piscina. It's a feminine word, even though you won't necessarily associate a fish pond with women. And again, there's a pattern here. So if we look at this pattern, they're all ending in the letter A. This is another good thing to write down. The letter A is a marker of a feminine gendered word. So in terms of Latin gender, the A is feminine, the US is masculine. So you might be asking, why is gender important? Well, it's important for a couple reasons. But first, you want to think about, what gender do adjectives have? So specifically, we've been talking about nouns up until this point. But what about adjectives? So let's look at this sentence. Marcus est puer Romanus, or Marcus is a Roman boy. The noun here, or one of them, is puer, which means boy. And we can see that it's being modified by the adjective Romanus, a Roman boy. Now, since puer is talking about a boy, which is a male, this is a masculine noun. But what about the adjective that goes with it? Well, if we look closely, you can see that Romanus is ending in a US. This means that the adjective Romanus is also masculine, which makes a lot of sense since it's modifying a masculine word, boy. Let's look at another sentence. Cornelia est puella Romana. Cornelia is a Roman girl. It's basically the exact same sentence, but we've changed who we're talking about from Marcus to Cornelia. So let's look at the word puella, or girl. Again, it's talking about a Roman girl. So the adjective Roman is modifying puella, just like Roman modified puer in the last sentence. And we can see that since puella ends in an A and it's talking about a girl, this is going to be a feminine noun. But look at how Romana has been changed. Whereas before it was Romanus with a US, this word is now feminine. So instead of a US, it has an A on the end, which makes sense because it's now modifying a feminine noun in puella. So you want to remember that the rule is adjectives always agree with their nouns in 3 things. And those 3 things are case, number, and gender. So let's take a look at an example sentence. Servus Romanus clama. The Roman slave shouts. So if we look at the noun servus, we can see that it's nominative, it's singular, and it's masculine. Now if we switch over to the adjective that goes with it, Romanus, you'll see that it agrees exactly. The case is nominative, the number is singular, and the gender is masculine. It's agreeing in all 3. This is how nouns and adjectives work in Latin. So what about if a noun doesn't end in an A or a US? So let's think of this example sentence. Arbor in horto est magna, which means the tree in the garden is large. Now if we look at arbor, we've seen this word before, and we know that it ends in an R, which doesn't quite fit into our categories of A or US. So what do we do with this word, meaning the tree? How do we tell what gender it is? Well, we can see that the adjective that goes with it is magna. It's talking about a large tree. Now, since we know that adjectives and nouns agree in case, number, and gender, we can work backwards using magna to figure out this information about arbor. So the first thing we want to notice is that magna ends in an A. This means that it's going to be feminine. Since magna is feminine, we know that arbor is also feminine. This is why gender is so important. The noun and adjective always agree. So we can tell by looking at the adjective the gender of this noun.